My CEO forced me to take the blame for a failed merger, so I released the email chain he thought was deleted. Kokor. I need everyone to understand something very clearly, he said, his voice smooth and unhurried, one hand resting on the back of my chair like he owned it. Like he owned me. This failure traces back to one person. The boardroom went still. 20 pairs of eyes swiveled toward me. Investors, executives, legal counsel from 3 different firms, people whose names appeared in financial columns, people who had shaken my hand just 40 minutes earlier. My throat closed. What are you? Olivia mismanaged the final negotiations, he continued, cutting through my voice like it was static. Critical details were overlooked. Assurances were made that had no basis. That is why we're standing in this room today, explaining a collapsed merger to people who trusted this company. He didn't look at me once. Not once. I sat there, senior strategy director, 7 years of work, 3 major deals rescued from the edge, being reduced to a sentence, a footnote, a reason. My hands were flat on the table. I hadn't moved them because if I so much as shifted, something would break. Possibly me. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't an honest mistake. This was execution. Deliberate. Precise. Premeditated. And it had already worked. I felt my fingers dig into the underside of the conference table. Not in panic. In recognition. Because 3 nights before that room, before those 20 faces, before that sentence that swallowed my entire career whole, I had flagged the exact clause he was now pinning on me. 11:42 at night. I was still at my desk. I read the revised merger terms, spotted the shifted risk allocation, and emailed him immediately. Clear language. Specific concern. Timestamp proof. His reply came within 4 minutes. Leave it. I'll handle it. 4 words. And now, 4 days later, he stood in front of a boardroom full of witnesses and called my silence a failure. The room was still buzzing, quiet, careful whispers passing between suits. No one met my eye, not the general counsel, not the CFO, not the 2 board members who had personally championed my hire. That was the detail that carved deepest, not the accusation itself, but the speed with which the room accepted it. No one asked for my side. No one even paused. And in that terrible, clarifying stillness, I understood something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't improvised. This was choreographed. He had done this before. My name is Olivia Hayes. For 7 years, I held the title of Senior Strategy Director at Vantage Capital Group, a mid-sized but fiercely ambitious investment firm that built its reputation on closing deals other companies walked away from. That was my particular value. I didn't just manage deals, I diagnosed them. I stayed late reading term sheets while other people attended dinners. I spotted the fault lines before they cracked. I was not hired for optics or diversity metrics or as someone's personal project. I was hired because I was good. Promotions came because results came first. 2 deals in my first 18 months that the firm had nearly abandoned. 1 renegotiated partnership that quietly became our most profitable account. I was the person they called when the situation was already ugly and getting worse, including this merger. Especially this merger. The Halcott Vantage deal had been teetering since the 2nd quarter. I was brought in at month 3 to stabilize it. I rewrote the due diligence framework. I flew to 3 cities in 8 days. I held the thing together with both hands. So how did I become the person who destroyed it? Simple mathematics, it turned out. Someone had to fall. And I was standing precisely where he needed me to stand. Security didn't need to escort me. They didn't have to put a hand on my arm or guide me through the corridor. The humiliation was more sophisticated than that. HR was already waiting outside the boardroom doors. Not arriving, waiting, already positioned, folder already printed, 2 copies, one for their records, one for mine. The termination language was clean, legal, and disturbingly precise for something supposedly decided in the last hour. The HR director, a quiet woman named Pauline, gave me the kind of smile that has been practiced to communicate sympathy without admitting any fault. "I think it's best we handle this as smoothly as possible," she said. Quietly. Quietly. After I had just been named, by name without evidence in front of the firm's most important stakeholders, as the single point of failure in a multi-million-dollar collapse. I looked at the folder. I looked at Pauline. I nodded. Not because I agreed. Not because I was broken. Because I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. An argument in that hallway served none of those steps. I took my copy. I signed where I was told to sign. I walked to my office, collected the things that mattered, and I left nothing behind that I needed. This was not over. It had barely started. I sat in my car for 22 minutes, engine off, keys in my lap, hands loose on the wheel, not crying, not calling anyone, just thinking. The way I think when a deal isn't adding up, when the numbers are technically right, but something underneath them is still wrong. Something was wrong here. Not emotionally, I had already absorbed that blow. What bothered me was structural. The logistics of what had just happened didn't hold together. He moved too fast. The paperwork Pauline handed me was not drafted that morning. That language takes time. Legal reviews it, HR formats it, someone signs off. That entire process does not happen in the 90 minutes between the merger's collapse and the moment I was walked out. Which meant one thing. The paperwork was ready before the meeting started. Before the investor sat down. Before he laid his hand on the back of my chair. He had prepared the exit strategy. Not for the merger, for me. And if he had gone to that trouble, built a story clean enough to produce pre-printed termination forms on cue, then somewhere underneath it all, there had to be a trail. Careful lies require careful construction. And careful construction leaves evidence. I started the engine. 3 nights before the boardroom, 11:42 p.m. I remember the exact time because I had been watching it tick forward on the corner of my screen, calculating whether I had enough hours left to sleep before the 6 a.m. call with the Halcott legal team. I was reviewing the final revised terms, the version circulated late that afternoon with minimal fanfare. 1 attachment, 31 pages. Most people on the distribution list would skim it. I read every word. That was when I found it. A clause, Section 9, subsection C. 3 sentences that had been subtly restructured from the prior draft. The risk allocation language, previously mutual, previously balanced, had shifted. Quietly, almost undetectably, if you weren't reading with your whole attention. But I was. The effect of that shift was significant. If the deal encountered a trigger event in the following quarter, the liability assignment was now lopsided. Vantage absorbed the majority, and the person named as lead oversight on the compliance side was me. I drafted my concern immediately, sent it directly to him. Clear subject line, specific page and clause number, explicit language about the downstream risk. He replied in 4 minutes. Leave it, I'll handle it. I trusted him. That was the last time I would. I was home by 7:30 that evening. I didn't pour a drink. I didn't call my sister. I sat down at my kitchen table, opened my personal laptop, and logged into my email archive. The account I had used for internal correspondence, backed up privately at the beginning of every month out of a habit that had never felt necessary until now. I searched his name, scrolled back 14 months. The email was there. My message to him, time-stamped, clear, precise. Section 9, subsection C. The exact concern, the exact language, the exact night. His reply, 4 words. 28 seconds past 11:46 p.m. Leave it, I'll handle it. I sat with that for a long moment. Because here was the thing. In the boardroom, he had stated, in front of witnesses and legal counsel, that I had overlooked critical details. That I had failed to raise concerns, that the collapsed clause had slipped through due to my negligence. But I had raised it, in writing, with timestamps, and he had told me in writing to stand down. My pulse didn't race. It slowed. The way it does when chaos resolves into clarity. Because I wasn't powerless in this. I wasn't starting from zero. I had something. Not enough, but somewhere to begin. Once I started pulling the threads, I couldn't find a clean place to stop. It began with that one email chain. Then I searched adjacent dates, related deal names, overlapping personnel. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I started finding it. A pattern. It wasn't dramatic at first. Quiet decisions, small moments. A meeting summary that attributed an idea to him that I had raised in a prior memo. A risk flag I'd submitted that appeared, rephrased, in a board update, attributed to his judgment. A recommendation I'd made in writing, dismissed at the time, later adopted and presented as his own. Individually, any one of these could be dismissed. A misattribution. an oversight, a manager summarizing loosely, but together, reading them in sequence chronologically, the shape became unmistakable. He had a system. He positioned himself adjacent to every success. And whenever something threatened to go wrong, whenever there was turbulence or miscalculation, he created distance. Not obviously. Not in ways you'd notice in real time. Only in hindsight. Only if you spread everything flat and looked at all of it at once, which I was now doing. At 1:45 in the morning, at my kitchen table, with cold tea and a sharpening sense of what had been done to me. By 2 in the morning, I stopped calling it a setup. I started calling it what it was. A management philosophy. He didn't improvise when things failed. He planned for failure the same way he planned for success, by ensuring someone else's fingerprints were always closer to the problem than his own. It was methodical, patient, the kind of behavior that takes years to build and requires a particular intelligence, not brilliant, but tactical. He never raised his voice in meetings, never issued reckless directives, never left obvious misconduct in plain sight. Instead, he delegated visibility. If the deal worked, he had been the architect. If it collapsed, the person with their name on the most recent action item absorbed the consequences. That was the function I had served on the Halcott merger from the moment he brought me in. Not to save the deal, though I had, but to be attached to it, documented within it, visible enough inside it that when a failure was needed, I was the most credible candidate for blame. And the clause in Section 9, the one I flagged, the one he told me to leave, that wasn't an oversight. That was the trigger, designed to fire, with my name already on it. I closed my laptop at 2:58 a.m. I had 3 options, and I considered all of them honestly. The first, hire an employment attorney, file a wrongful termination claim, pursue formal legal redress, legitimate, slow, expensive, and easily countered by a man with the firm's full legal resources behind him and a narrative already established in the room where it mattered most. The second, go to the press. Finance journalists existed for exactly this kind of story. But speculation without documentation was noise, and noise could be dismissed, discredited, buried. I had seen it happen to people who moved too soon. The third option required the most discipline. Go quiet, completely quiet. No statements, no interviews, no visible anger, no LinkedIn post defending my record, nothing that would signal to him that I was building anything at all. Because the moment he sensed I was moving, he would move first. He was better resourced. He had more allies in the firm. He had the narrative already distributed, but he didn't have what I had. He didn't know what I'd kept, and he didn't know that I now understood with complete clarity exactly what he had done and precisely why. I went to bed. I slept 4 hours, and in the morning, I started building. I gave myself one rule: document everything twice. Every email was downloaded, logged, and backed up to 2 separate encrypted drives. One at home, one in a safety deposit box at the bank branch 3 blocks from my apartment. I printed physical copies of the most critical exchanges, organized them chronologically in a binder that I labeled, with a quiet private humor, Q3 filing reference. I was not building a case out of emotion. I was building an archive. There is a significant difference. Emotion selects the evidence that hurts most. An archive collects everything, including the items that might complicate my narrative, the moments where I made assumptions, the emails where I could have pushed harder and didn't. I included those too. Because if I was going to release this, when I released this, I needed it to be unimpeachable. Not a grievance, not a rebuttal. A record. I spent the better part of 5 days on the initial compilation, cross-referencing dates, mapping decisions against outcomes, building a timeline that anyone, a journalist, a board member, a regulator, a shareholder, could follow without my commentary attached. The evidence needed to speak in its own voice, not mine. Because my voice was already tainted in the only room where it had mattered. The documents were not. He called on a Wednesday afternoon, 10 days after the boardroom. I almost didn't answer. But I recognized the number, Mark Osei, formerly of Vantage's in-house legal team. He and I had worked adjacent on 2 deals, professional relationship, Careful, precise, the kind of lawyer who chose his words with the seriousness of someone who understood exactly how much they cost. "You didn't deserve what happened," he said. I stayed quiet. Let it breathe. "I was in that room," he continued. "I saw the way it was framed, the timing of the paperwork, He paused. "It wasn't right, Olivia. I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I'm not just saying it." His voice dropped slightly. "Be careful with what you're doing. However you're approaching this, whatever you're collecting. A beat. This isn't the first time he's done something like this." I stood up straighter. "Can you prove that?" I asked. Long pause. "The kind that means someone is weighing something heavier than words." "Maybe," he said finally. I did not respond immediately. I looked out my kitchen window at the street below. A man walking a dog. A delivery van, double parked. Ordinary, quiet, irreversible world. "Tell me what you know," I said. Mark didn't send files. He was too careful for that. Too aware of what forwarding internal documents from the firm's legal department could cost him professionally and legally. He understood the landscape, and I respected that he was still choosing to help within those limits. What he sent instead was direction. A name. An archived case reference number from 18 months prior. A quiet suggestion about which server logs were maintained on a third-party system, one the firm's IT team did not fully administer and therefore could not fully scrub. "Some things," he said in our second call, measured and deliberate, "don't delete as cleanly as people assume, especially when the deletion was rushed." I wrote everything down. Then he said one more thing, and I have thought about it since. "He did this to someone before you. That person signed an NDA and left the industry. Don't be that person." I wasn't going to be. I thanked him. I didn't ask him for anything further. What he had given me was already more than I could have found alone. Not evidence itself, but a map to where evidence still existed. That was enough. I smiled for the first time since the boardroom, because now I had a system to work within. The third-party archive server required a formal data access request. As a former employee with documented standing on the relevant projects, I was entitled to file one. A lawyer friend helped me word it correctly. I did not tell her why. It took 11 days. When the partial recovery arrived, it was incomplete. Fragments, recovered threads, reconstructed headers. Not a clean read. More like a document torn apart and then painstakingly reassembled out of sequence. But enough. There was an internal chain. 3 participants. Him, the firm's CFO, a man named Warren, and an external consultant, Broderick Associates, engaged during the merger's second phase. The thread spanned 6 days in the weeks before the boardroom meeting. I read it 3 times before my hands were fully steady. The language was careful, corporate careful, the kind that sounds like neutral business discussion until you understand the specific context. But one line needed no interpretation at all. "We should position Olivia as the primary oversight contact going forward. If the deal encounters friction, the accountability trail needs to run through her role, not ours." 3 weeks before the merger collapsed. 3 weeks before he stood in that boardroom and told 20 people it was my fault. I set the papers down. I simply updated the binder. The recovered email chain changed the geometry of everything. Before it, I had a strong case for personal vindication. Proof that I had raised concerns, proof that he had overridden them, proof that the narrative in the boardroom was false. That was significant, but it was also narrow. It could be framed as a he said, she said dispute between a terminated employee and her former boss. Messy, contested, easy to complicate. The recovered chain was something else entirely. It was not about a disagreement, it was about intent. It documented, across 6 days of correspondence, a deliberate decision to use my professional position as a liability shield. Not because my judgment was faulty, but because my name needed to be attached to the risk so that theirs would not be. This wasn't one bad moment. This was policy. And if it was policy, then it had been applied before. Mark had said as much. I shifted the focus of my archive. I stopped organizing around the Halcott merger specifically and began building a broader timeline. Other deals, other personnel decisions, other exits from the firm that had been quiet, unremarkable, and when I started looking, oddly well-timed. The picture that emerged was larger than me. and it needed to land somewhere large enough to matter. I thought about timing every single day, because releasing evidence is not simply an act of truth-telling, it is a strategic decision, and strategy poorly executed. No matter how strong the underlying material can be neutralized, discredited, absorbed. He had resources I didn't, retained counsel, board relationships, 12 years of carefully maintained reputation, the ability to issue a counter-statement within hours of anything I sent, framing me as a disgruntled former employee pursuing personal grievance. If I moved too soon, he would be ready. If I moved too emotionally, with anger visible in my language, with the tone of someone seeking revenge rather than accountability, I would hand him the narrative. I needed a moment of maximum exposure, a moment when he was most publicly visible, a moment when the audience I needed to reach would already be paying attention, when a counter-statement would look exactly like what it was, desperate. I did not have to wait long. The firm announced a press briefing, a formal public statement regarding the Halcott merger failure, planned for a Thursday, hosted by their communications team, led by him. I read the announcement twice, set my phone face down on the table, and began preparing for Thursday. The press briefing was scheduled for 2 p.m. I watched the live stream from my apartment, seated at the kitchen table where I had spent the better part of 3 weeks building everything I was about to release. The table that had held the binders, the cold tea, the early mornings and the late nights. He looked polished, navy suit, no tie, a deliberate choice, communicating approachability rather than stiffness. He had done media training, I knew, probably refreshed it recently. His answers were measured and warm, conveying the impression of a leader who had absorbed a genuine setback with maturity and transparency. He spoke for 11 minutes. He referenced the merger's complexity, the market conditions, the inherent risk in deals of this scale. He spoke about organizational learning and accountability and the firm's commitment to doing better. He did not say my name, but he didn't have to, because the industry knew, the partners knew, the investors who had been in that boardroom knew. The absence of my name was its own statement, one that said, "The matter is resolved, the responsible party has been dealt with, we have moved on." He was still telling my story. To a larger room. I looked at the clock. 2:17 p.m. I opened my email. My hand rested on the mouse. One click, that was all. I had spent 3 weeks being certain of what I had, certain of what it meant, certain that it was right. And I was still certain. The documentation was clean, the timeline was airtight, the recovered chain was unambiguous. But certainty about facts and certainty about consequences are entirely different things. Once this left my drafts folder and landed in the inboxes of the people I had selected, I could not take it back. There would be no quiet resolution, no private settlement, no version of this where I disappeared gracefully and started somewhere fresh without anyone knowing the full shape of what had happened. This would be permanent. That was not a reason to stop. It was just something I needed to look at honestly, for 1 full minute, before I chose it with total clarity. I thought about the person Mark had mentioned, the one who signed the NDA and left the industry. I thought about what that silence had cost them. I thought about the next person whose name would be positioned on the wrong side of one of his email chains. I exhaled once, slowly. Then I clicked. I did not post anything online. No public statement, no LinkedIn article. No anonymous submission to a finance news outlet. Nothing designed for viral distribution, for social amplification, for the particular chaos of public exposure. I sent the package to 6 recipients. The Vantage Capital Group Board of Directors, all 4 members, individually addressed, the firm's external legal compliance officer, a role that reported independently of executive leadership, and 2 of the 3 external partners from the Halcott deal, the lead counsel from Halcott's side, and the independent financial advisor whose firm had co-signed the risk assessment framework that the collapsed clause had been embedded in. No cover letter with emotion in it, no declaration of injustice, no personal statement at all. Just the subject line, documentation, Halcott merger, timeline, and internal correspondence for review. Attached, the full binder, organized chronologically, every email I had preserved, the recovered chain, the timeline mapping decisions to outcomes. The Section 9 clause flag and his forward response. Everything labeled. Nothing editorially framed. I let the material carry its own weight, because the people I was sending it to were professionals who read documents for a living. They did not need me to tell them what to think. They just needed to see it. The first 12 hours were silence. Complete, unbroken silence. No acknowledgments. No responses. No out-of-office replies. Nothing from the board. Nothing from the compliance officer. Nothing from either of the external partners. I had expected some version of this. I knew the recipients would read carefully before responding, that this was not the kind of material anyone received and immediately replied to. It required consultation. It required their own legal review. It required, at minimum, a conversation among themselves before any of them would put a single word in writing back to me. But knowing this intellectually and living through the silence were two different experiences. I cleaned my apartment, made real food for the first time in days, called my sister and had a conversation about absolutely nothing. Her son's school play, a restaurant she'd been to, a trip she was considering. I did not tell her anything. I laughed at the right moments. At 11:40 p.m. I checked my email one final time. Nothing. I put the phone face down on the nightstand. At 12:34 a.m., it rang. I looked at the screen. Mark. I answered on the second ring. They've seen it, Mark said. His voice was careful. The kind of careful that means someone is standing somewhere they're not sure is safe. All of them? I asked. The board, yes. Compliance officer confirmed receipt. I don't have visibility on the external partners yet, but a pause. The board convened a call 2 hours ago, unscheduled, no agenda distributed internally. I sat up. And him? I asked. A beat. He's denying it. I almost laughed. Not bitterly, almost with relief. Because denial was the response of a man who had read the documents and understood that they were real. Dismissal would have been different. Dismissal says the accusation has no weight. Denial says I see the threat and I am trying to neutralize it. Denial meant fear. Denial meant he was already losing ground that he didn't know how to recover. He's calling it a fabrication, Mark continued, saying the recovered chain was taken out of context, that there's an innocent explanation for the language. There's a timestamp, I said. I know. There's a complete thread. I know, Olivia. A long pause. They're going to have to investigate, he said. They don't have a choice now. The internal review was announced on a Friday, not in a press release, not in a company-wide email, quietly, through the board's retained law firm, in a letter to key stakeholders indicating that Vantage Capital Group had initiated an independent review of certain internal communications and decision-making processes related to the Halcott merger. Careful, neutral language. But to anyone who understood what it meant the documents had been taken seriously. That someone had read the recovered email chain and found it credible enough to investigate rather than dismiss. I learned about it from Mark, who heard it from the firm's external counsel. What he translated into plain language was this. Once the board's law firm began pulling the relevant records, they did not stop at the Halcott file. The pattern I had mapped, other deals, other exits, other quiet moments of reassigned blame, those threads were visible in the broader records too. Older decisions, earlier deals, names I recognized. The investigation had started because of me. But it was not going to end with me. I sat with that for a long time, because this was the part I had hoped was true, without allowing myself to depend on it. The pattern was real, and now people with genuine authority were seeing it. He was not fired in a public moment. There was no dramatic confrontation in a boardroom, no press statement naming him, no visible fall. Nothing that would have satisfied the part of me that had sat in that conference room while 20 people watched him end my career without blinking. What actually happened was quieter and in many ways more complete. He was placed on administrative leave the Tuesday after the review was formally opened. Then the leave extended. Then the board's law firm requested his cooperation with a second phase review of 2 prior deals, one from 18 months ago, one from 3 years back. He retained private counsel, his name disappeared from the firm's website. His email auto-reply began redirecting inquiries to a deputy. His LinkedIn went private. And then, on a Wednesday morning, 41 days after I sat in my car outside the firm and asked myself what kind of trail a man like him would leave, his departure was confirmed. No press statement. No farewell communication to staff. A single line in a regulatory filing noting an executive leadership transition. Gone. Quietly. The way he had tried to make me go. Except I had gone with my dignity intact and my documentation organized. He went with an independent legal firm still reviewing his files.